Hey guys, and welcome back to Rage Gaming, and a pretty big day from Monster Hunter news. An in-person event has happened in Japan where traditional media went to play a new version of the game, and it seems like it was the full version of the game as we're going to talk about. They were able to play like the first 5 hours of the game in an open way, which means we're going to see Scarlet Forest, including the monsters like lala, barina, congalala, duna, even quematrice was shown. So there's lots to discuss and talk about. We'll be going through a bunch of the different resources, referencing where it's from, and listing off lots of things you might want to know about from it all. With that said, I'll need to get into some disclaimers, but let's get into it. Starting with this one. This is footage from the video Monster Hunter Wilds exclusive 4K gameplay. This was posted by the YouTube channel and media outlet VGC. So here's that disclaimer I mentioned. This is longsword footage, and I would love to kind of comment on what's changed and what's different here, but we didn't really see a lot of longsword gameplay here. And it's obviously from a player that's maybe even not had much time with Monster Hunter in general, or longsword in particular. I'm not going to really be hard on this person. It doesn't matter whether they're good or bad at the game, but it's not the best footage to look at to learn about the weapon and if things have changed. We do get a look at the congalala intro cutscene, which is interesting to me because in a different video they talked about how they're not allowed to show any cinematics, so maybe it's fine. But it's a pretty cute cutscene with the feline tribe here finding themselves obsessed with the congalala fur. But a lot of what we're going to get here is information listening, like how they talked about how this wasn't a demo build, but literally the game they got to play, and how it felt so much smoother than, say, the demo version they played at Gamescom. One topic that's going to come up a lot, though, throughout all of these videos, is how people say that it feels a lot more story-focused, even more so than World. The devs said that the story is about the hunters rather than not flagship monsters particularly. Now, a lot of people have different opinions about this, but I do think it's a good thing to break this repetitive, boring formula. And we'll talk more about that later. Something spotted by Josh while watching this footage was critical draw. It lasts a couple seconds and is the crit flash effect, but also this footage seems to have actual skills beyond what we saw in the open beta. There's another topic that we'll talk about in this, which is hit stop, which does seem to be back, which we'll talk about in the second video more. Now, something that this player talked about is how monsters would move zones a lot in the open beta. And thankfully in this version it's been addressed. They were told that it was an issue that was overly happening, and they've definitely reduced that, so I'm hugely relieved because man, it was annoying. Something this reviewer talked about is how performance issues seem to be mostly gone or significantly reduced from their experience. They were looking for issues, looking for frame drops, looking for anything they could spot. They were playing in graphics mode, 4K with 30 frames consistently though. So, take that for what it's worth. I would say we've had a progression, but the question is how much, and obviously PC was a bigger issue in my opinion. During this we got to look at doshaguma versus quematrice, though it's not exactly a turf war, more of just an interaction and a bit of a fight. We did notice that there are quests such as slay 8 monsters, little side things like that are back, hopefully with some relevant rewards. And they also discussed, like various reviewers did, that they got a full-on kind of look at the studio. We've now seen clips where we're seeing motion capture with how they do it. A great sword user contesting a doshaguma, but it's actually 2 dudes playing the doshaguma, and they get into it. As well as hearing about other things, such as how they make the sounds for the monsters and the weird instruments they use for that purpose. In this footage, we do get a look at a bit of lala barina in the nest and an actual finished hunt with it. But that's alongside quematrice gameplay and duna gameplay, which got us a nice look at duna changing zones by swimming in the deep river, or what duna looks like without those fins actually covering her, which looks a little derpish, but I do like it. Another thing from this footage confirmed was repel quests that are actually returning. Interestingly, these were normally only for elder dragons. A big topic with Monster Hunter Wilds is if there's going to be any elder dragons. And it was said by the devs in the past that elder dragons are an important thing for the series, but say World, that had a hyper focus on elder dragons. And in Wilds, they're looking to focus on other things. Apex predators is a new concept, right? And they may be replacing the concept of elder dragons, at least for now. Since repel quests are back and they're normally for elder dragons, and there aren't any here, that may give more sort of credit to the idea that there is no elders in this version of Wilds. But there's a bunch of stuff from the first video, let's go to another one. This video is called "We spent 5 hours with a new preview build of Monster Hunter Wilds, and we already want 500 more." This was posted by the media outlet game's radar. This one gives us a great confirmation right at the beginning. They talk about how this is confirmed to be a much newer version of the game than say what we played at say events such as Gamescom or of course the open beta. But very important when you're watching this stuff, guys, is that they confirmed that this is also not the final version of the game. The final game has more polish and special attention given to the PC version in particular. This is great to hear, not a surprise, but good to have confirmation. There's still dev time and they're working hard on performance as a high priority, as they've said before. Now that's awesome, but look at this. It's the electric cage hammer is back. It looks absolutely incredible, and this is a nice confirmation for me that sillier kind of weapon designs are going to be in Wilds, which is a fun aspect of the games. We saw a lot of that in Rise and a lot less of that in World. I'd like to see a kind of middle ground between the two. And obviously, absolutely no World designs where it's just, hey, an all weapon with a bit of monster slapped on it. This is a great sign. Now this reviewer talks about how incredibly smooth it plays compared to previous experience, which again is a nice confirmation, but more importantly, we have great sword here and true charge slash being used as an example of hit stop being very much back. This was discussed in a post-play interview as well, where they talked about hit stop and how it was a big issue after open beta feedback. It's been hard confirmed to be back. Obviously we see that reflected in the gameplay a bit now, but there's also other weapon changes to reference too. But yeah, we can see the real hit stop as this true charge slash slams into lala barina and has a bit of weight and pause behind it, which is really nice. Now something that's going to be mentioned throughout all of these different reviews is a reference to rebalancing, and in particular 4 weapons that are going to get a big tune-up for the launch of the game. It was said by one reviewer that they are actually encouraged not to mess with say lance and switch axe because they're getting some big changes. But for the 4 weapons getting big changes for launch, it was lance, switch axe, insect glaive and SNS, as we're going to get into later. But they highlighted control issues and focus mode in particular for some of these weapons that are getting changes. As we go through this footage though, we get more lala barina gameplay, again more nest there, which is going to be cool to see. During the footage with quematrice, we did see some interesting UI stuff, like the Village of Whispering Winds quest, where we're here to hunt the quematrice. But there's optional missions like use a paratoad, use a vine trap, or you know, this pop-up talking about focus mode wounds and how that works. It is nice for new players to encourage trying these different things, just to get comfortable with them. Something I want to say about this reviewer and this footage is that they seem to have actually played the open beta and the game a lot more than some of the others. So I trusted them a lot more when they said they found duna harder than Ray Dow in their experience with the beta, giving some nice information about how duna fights in general. During this footage, we also get a little look at duna in a kind of exhausted state. You can see it popping up on the map that it's hungry, so it's sort of limping and dragging itself along. As the reviewer explained, that they thought duna would be kind of a easier apex predator overall, but it's ultimately been one of their favorite monsters they've played so far, with lala barina at the top, which is very exciting. At this point, they also talked more about hit stop, referencing again that it was a direct result of beta feedback, which is awesome. But why I bring this up again is that the reviewer said something interesting the dev said. They got feedback from World and Iceborne that hit stop was actually too much, so they're a little confused. Maybe they went a bit too far with it, sure, but I find that interesting that they got a lot of feedback in World that hit stop was too much. So this overcorrection just happened. It was also mentioned that finisher attacks are going to be particularly hit stoppy to really help the feel of the weight of them. Another reference to how this was kind of a fuller version of the game is how they could actually kill monsters over and over and get any material from it, ultimately allowing them to make gear as it was, the real game. We've heard references that people were actually able to look at the blacksmith and get information from that, so real crafting being done. On that note, it was said by this reviewer that the general process felt pretty similar to 5th gen World, having a crafting tree, going down that, but it does imply good customization to come. Obviously, a big topic is the skills being split between your weapon and armor, and how we have specific offensive skills on our weapons, how that will change when we swap weapon to allow for different sets. But a big deal here that was talked about by this reviewer was the skills being split between weapons and armor, and it sounded like they were talking about offensive skills tied to a weapon, and they gave examples, like they saw attack boost and guard on a lance, charge up and slugger on a hammer, rapid morph on charge blade, focus on greatsword. It sounds like these skills are just tied to that weapon. So the greatsword has focus, whether you decorated it or not. I may be misunderstanding that, and I would love to actually learn more about this. But they're obviously trying to make it so the weapons have the offensive skills, and armor is more utility and defensive. This is obviously with the 2-weapon system in mind to make that functional. But Josh was telling me that he thinks this could backfire because, you know, most people are going to just use their first favorite weapon anyway and want more skills for that than what maybe we'll be able to get, but we'll see. Interestingly, they didn't want to tell us how many skills we can expect on an endgame set, but have confirmed new skills and also kind of an update of the old ones. Like instead of having to get 5 ranks or something, you only need to get 3, that kind of thing. So we'll get more for less, but it does imply less skills at the endgame. To be fair, especially in Sunbreak, we would have many pages of skills, and it was a lot to manage and talk about, so maybe this will be good long term. Now, this reviewer also said something really interesting about the story, how they felt what they watched was surprisingly strong compared to what they've experienced with previous Monster Hunter games. We've heard a lot about the story, and I'm going to talk about it a lot in this next one. Everyone seems to agree that it's much more story focused, but the split is on whether they like that or not. Overall, people were saying the pacing feels better though, more like how it should, which is a nice thing to hear. But now let's talk about the next one. The video titled, I played Monster Hunter Wilds in Osaka and it's worth the wait. And this was posted by the outlet The Gamer. Now, unfortunately, this video in large part is just a discussion about Monster Hunter in general, rather than someone talking about specific gameplay and information. I do think it's interesting to listen to in its own way, but obviously what we're desperate for is the new details and talking about that. I got the sensation that this reviewer and player has played Monster Hunter before, but very casually and limited. That is obviously fine, but yeah, forewarning. Now, this features different insect glaive gameplay against things like congalala and even quematrice, but this shows us insect glaive gameplay, which is very exciting because it shows the bounces back as heavily requested. In this footage, we can see them successfully land a jumping, advancing slash, which triggers a bounce back up into the air, which is referred to as the vaulting dance. That is exactly how it worked in the previous games. That is literally what we see in this gameplay. Aerial bounces back, which means aerial insect glaive is back. I think a lot of people are going to be really happy with that, even if it's still probably not the meta thing to do. It's a fun thing to do. It's part of the weapon fantasy. It's a huge win. So you can enjoy the insect glaive gameplay while we talk about this. So again, this reviewer talked about how this was more of an expanded version of what we've seen with the open beta. This version was very different in its feel, based on weapon balance changes, and of course things like hit stop and so on. Now, the story is a big topic for this video, a bit too much in my opinion, but you know, they want to talk about it, that's fair enough. So the Gamer reviewer stated that Wilds felt very story focused, as we've heard. But that's a concern for this reviewer because Monster Hunter games, generally, the story isn't the strongest part, and I think that's very fair to say. I think it's going to be similar to what it's always been personally. The story is going to be a key part of how we progress, why we're going to different places, why we're following this or that trail, why we're hunting that monster. But ultimately, most of the game I play won't be the story. It'll be a small section I played at the start. Obviously, we hope the story will be better and more interesting than before, but it is just a vehicle for the actual game. The fair concern of this reviewer, though, is that the cutscenes were a little too often for him, a little too invasive. If the story is good, it'll be fine, but if it's too invasive for people that don't want to see it, it could be a problem. Having said that, if you don't want to watch them, you can skip them. And again, it's a small section of how much time I'm going to play this game. Now, interestingly, they stated that in these opening 5 hours, they were bouncing between the Windward Plains and the Scarlet Forest a lot. It seems the first 2 locales are going to be very connected to the story initially, rather than what I was imagining. I thought we'd experience the first locale, complete the story there mostly, then the Scarlet Forest would open up and we go to that, and so on and so on. So in another way, they're changing the formula here, which is a good thing. They're really focusing on the locale story, the people there, their relationship with the world and the monsters. It's good that they're trying something new. And amazingly, this reviewer stated the weather changed once in his 5 hours of playing, which is a stark difference to our experience in the beta, which was so often it was too much. It seems during the story, the weather will be tied to the story and won't happen randomly. Maybe at a certain point, it'll all be unlocked and it'll happen naturally. But this does explain the cinematics in Trailer 5, where the tribe was saying how they activated the fire spring intentionally. So maybe once you do it the first time, it now just becomes possible, or something like that. While this reviewer says they didn't fight any unrevealed monsters, they did fight everything that we've seen so far in at least, say, the Windward Plains and the Scarlet Forest, but they even encountered arkveld, which is apparently where their 5-hour play session was kind of forced to end. It gives us a good idea though when we're going to encounter the flagship. Right, so as I said, 4 weapons are also going to be majorly overhauled before the launch. They told us this is Lance, Switch Axe, Insect Glaive, and SNS. I read this text post about the experience referencing this. This reviewer said that they mostly used a hammer because their main, Lance, was one of the 2 weapons they were advised not to use because of substantial changes that are coming before the release. They said that Capcom is promising big upgrades for Lance and Switch Axe, and they also referenced Insect Glaive and Sword and Shield too. They emphasized control issues, focus mode fiddliness, with many of the changes informed by beta test feedback. All of that's awesome to hear. In my opinion, Lance just needs damage increases overall, where Switch Axe needs kind of a bigger rebalance, like the sword counter being more of a punishment, or all the damage is basically in full release and how that's a bad thing, and how full release is kind of too slow to work in a satisfying way a lot of the time. How they nerfed the sword combo that combos into the attached zero sum. How in my opinion they should increase the damage of things outside of the full release. So yeah, Lance needs damage increases but works well, where Switch Axe needs a rebalance. Insect Glaive and SNS being upgraded in different ways is interesting to me. I definitely don't think Insect Glaive needs a damage boost, but it definitely needs kind of a look at in terms of the awkward keybinds. The way that it would lead to an awkward claw grip where you're charging an attack while doing something else. Not to mention the confusing aerial changes they made. And yeah, managing focus mode at the same time as using other stuff. So I'm pretty excited about those. SNS being referenced was a surprise to me though. I thought it had great movesets and options in general, and I thought the damage was reasonable for SNS overall, though I wouldn't say no to a damage bump for that too. Moving on to a couple things from Reddit though, there was a Reddit post about a Japanese outlet that had an interview. They translated a couple things from that, which were these. It is confirmed that they're disabling a hammer launching another player as a feature. So how we saw with say Charge Blade and the upper swing from that, not launching other players in the beta, it seems they're also turning that off for hammer. I'm not sure how people are going to feel about this. I guess it doesn't really matter, but it is a fun thing to do with friends, but also an annoying feature if you're playing with randoms online and they're kind of harassing you. On that note, there's also going to be a decoration that disables friendly fire, which is the same one they introduced in Sunbreak apparently. So that's pretty interesting. Throughout all of these reviews though, something that we've been hearing is great updates about performance and it feeling a lot smoother. Obviously we can't take that as a fact. This is for console it would seem. There's massive variation in rigs for normal people and PCs. A step forward is still good though, and they said again that they're very aware of PC and focusing on it, so hopefully that gives people some hope. The last thing I want to reference is this video posted by multiplayer.it, a congalala hunt using the dual blades. I did not spot anything new about the weapon in terms of moveset, but I do believe that this is the lala barina weapon, since it's these kind of 2 little sickles, kind of like her claws or something like that. And they do appear to be doing paralysis status per hit, triggered at one point in the hunt. So yeah, they look awesome. But that brings it to the end of this overview of a load of footage and information coming out. We plan to cover even more as it comes out and we really do some analysis, but I hope this was an interesting overview of a bunch of different stuff. For now though, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thank you for watching, see you next time.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.